my fiancé said. Cancel your surgery. My friends are visiting. I felt confused, shocked, and hurt. I agreed at first, but when I woke up alone after the surgery, the apartment was filled with empty bottles and laughter. I realized I was being used, and I canceled the wedding that was supposed to be forever. My jaw surgery wasn't cosmetic. It wasn't optional. It was something the doctor had explained carefully, slowly, with diagrams and concern. Chronic pain, nerve damage risk. Waiting longer could make it worse. And there she was, standing in our kitchen, scrolling on her phone, asking me to reschedule it like I was moving a dentist appointment. I laughed at first. A short, confused sound. You're joking, right? She didn't look up. They're only here for the weekend, she said. You can do it later. That was the moment I realized love can humiliate you. We'd been together 4 years, engaged for 1. Everyone thought we were solid, the kind of couple people pointed at and said, must be nice. We met at a mutual friend's birthday party. She spilled a drink on my shoes and laughed so hard she snorted. I fell for her instantly. She was warm, loud, magnetic, the kind of person who filled rooms without trying. For a long time, I felt lucky just to be near her. Living together felt natural. Engagement felt inevitable. When I proposed, she cried. Her friends screamed. Her mom hugged me and whispered, "Thank you for loving her." I believed I did, but somewhere along the way, love turned into accommodation, then into sacrifice, then into silence. I was the one who adjusted my schedule, my plans, my needs. She had a big personality, big emotions, big expectations. And I told myself that was just who she was. Relationships are about compromise, I thought. So when my jaw started locking up, when the pain crept into my ears and temples, I brushed it off at first. I worked through it, ate softer food, took painkillers, until the doctor said, "You shouldn't wait." The surgery date took months to get. Insurance approvals, time off work, mental preparation. I was scared, but also relieved. Like help was finally coming. I told her the date weeks in advance. She nodded, said, "Okay," then went back to talking about bridesmaid dresses. The week before surgery, she started acting distant, not angry, just distracted. Phone always in her hand, laughing at messages she wouldn't explain. I didn't think much of it. Then came the day her friends' group chat exploded. Apparently, 3 of her college friends were doing a spontaneous road trip. They wanted to crash at our place. Drink, party, relive the old days. She was glowing when she told me. "They're coming the same weekend as your surgery," she said, like it was a fun coincidence. He hesitated. That might be hard. I'll be recovering. I won't be able to talk much. Or host." She waved her hand. "They won't mind. They're here for me anyway." That should have been my warning. The night before my pre-op appointment, she sat across from me at the kitchen table. I was reading post-op instructions. Liquid diet, ice packs, no stress. She sighed dramatically. "So, I was thinking," she said, "what if you moved the surgery?" I looked up slowly. "What?" "Just by a few weeks," she said quickly. "My friends already booked time off. It would be awkward if you're all swollen and miserable." I stared at her. "You want me to delay surgery? Because it'd be awkward?" She shrugged. "I mean, yeah, and I don't want to babysit you while they're here." That word, babysit, something tightened in my chest. "This isn't a haircut," I said. "It's surgery." She rolled her eyes. "Don't be dramatic." I felt small, embarrassed, like I was asking for too much by needing medical care. "I'm in pain," I said quietly. She didn't respond, just stared at her phone again. The next morning, I went to the hospital alone. In the waiting room, surrounded by people clutching paperwork and nerves, I kept replaying her words in my head. "Cancel the surgery. My friends are visiting." I imagined waking up from anesthesia, groggy, in pain, alone, her laughing in the living room with wine glasses clinking. My phone buzzed. Her text read, "Did you reschedule? No good luck." "No, I love you." Just that. My hands shook as I typed back, "No." There was a long pause. Then, "Wow. Okay. Guess I know where I stand." I stared at the screen. "Where you stand?" I was the one on a hospital chair, terrified. I didn't respond. The surgery went fine. Painful, but fine. When I woke up, my face felt like it didn't belong to me. Swollen, numb, heavy. She didn't come. That night, my mom picked me up and took me to her place. She fussed over me like I was 12 again. Soup, ice packs, soft blankets. At some point, through the haze of medication, my phone buzzed again. A photo. Her friends. Our living room. Caption: much needed girls' weekend. I stared at that photo longer than I should have. Something in me went quiet. When I got back to the apartment 3 days later, the place smelled like alcohol and perfume. Empty bottles everywhere. Glitter on the couch. My recovery chair pushed into a corner like an afterthought. She was on the couch, scrolling. "Oh," she said. "You're back." No hug. No apology. "I need to talk," I said, my voice strained and swollen. She sighed. "Can it wait? I'm exhausted." That was it. Not anger, not sadness. Clarity. I wasn't angry anymore. I was done. I looked at the ring on her finger, the wedding binder on the shelf, the life I thought we were building, and for the first time, I asked myself a question I should have asked years ago. If this is how she treats me when I'm vulnerable, what happens when life gets really hard? I took a breath that hurt all the way down. "No," I said, "it can't wait." She looked up, annoyed, and that's when I finally said the words that would change everything. She stared at me like I'd just interrupted something important. "What is this about now?" she asked. I stayed standing. My jaw ached. Every word felt like work, but I needed to say them while I still had the courage. "This," I said, gesturing around the apartment, "this whole weekend, it broke something." She scoffed. "You're being dramatic again." I nodded slowly. "Yeah, you've said that before." She crossed her arms. "So what, you're mad because I had friends over?" "No," I said. "I'm mad because you chose a party over my health." She laughed. Not kindly, not nervously, just dismissively. "Oh my God, I didn't choose anything. You're the one who refused to reschedule." That sentence landed wrong, like blame wrapped in confidence. I swallowed. I didn't refuse. I needed surgery. She rolled her eyes so hard I thought they might stick. "You act like I asked you to climb Everest." I felt something detach inside me, like a final thread snapping. "I was scared," I said. "I was in pain, and you weren't there." She stood up abruptly. "I didn't sign up to be a nurse," she snapped. "And honestly, my friends think you're kind of milking this." That one hurt more than the surgery. "Your friends?" I repeated. She hesitated for half a second. "Just enough. They think you're controlling," she said. "Always making things about you." I stared at her, stunned. Controlling? I hadn't even asked her to cancel the weekend. I just wanted support. "Did you tell them the surgery wasn't optional?" I asked. She shrugged. I didn't go into details. Of course she didn't. I sat down slowly, my body aching. "So, you let them think I'm some dramatic obstacle to your fun." She didn't deny it. "Instead," she said, "you're really killing the vibe right now." The room went silent. That word again. Vibe. I looked at her like she was a stranger. That night, I couldn't sleep. Pain throbbed through my jaw, but worse was the replay in my head. Every time I'd swallowed my feelings. Every joke at my expense. Every moment I'd been inconvenient. "You're too sensitive. You're overthinking. Don't ruin the mood." I got up quietly and walked into the spare room, opened the closet, saw boxes stacked high. Wedding favors, table numbers, the suit I'd bought 3 months ago. My chest tightened. I thought about the future we'd planned. Kids, a house, hard days, and I realized something terrifying. If I stayed, this wouldn't be the worst moment of my life. It would be the beginning of many like it. I sat on the floor and cried silently, my face swollen and aching, my heart finally catching up to what my instincts had been screaming for years. The next morning, she acted like nothing happened. She made coffee, played music, hummed. "Do you want eggs?" she asked. I watched her for a moment. This woman I'd planned to marry. This woman who could dismiss me so easily. "No," I said. "We need to talk again." She sighed. "About what now?" I took a breath. "I can't do this anymore." She froze. "What do you mean?" "I mean, us," I said. "I don't feel safe here, emotionally." She laughed. "Wow, you're really spiraling." "I'm serious." She stared at me, then shook her head. "You're just sensitive because of the meds." That was her favorite weapon, invalidating reality. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the ring. Her eyes widened. "What are you doing?" she asked sharply. "I'm calling off the wedding." The silence that followed was thick. Then she exploded. "You can't be serious," she said. "Over this?" "Over everything," I replied. She paced the room. "This is insane. People will think you're cruel. Canceling a wedding because I had friends over." I stood my ground. "I'm canceling because when I needed you most, you chose convenience." She laughed bitterly. "You're really going to throw 4 years away?" I met her eyes. "You already did." That stopped her. For the first time, she looked unsure. Her tone changed after that. Softer, calculated. "Okay," she said slowly. Let's calm down. You're in pain. We'll talk later. No, I said. I've already talked enough. She reached for my arm. Don't do this. I stepped back. I'm staying with my mom for a while, I said. I'll come back for my things. Her face hardened instantly. So you're just abandoning me? I almost laughed. The irony was suffocating. I asked you to show up for me, I said. You couldn't. She shook her head. You're making a huge mistake. Maybe. But it was the first choice I'd made in years that felt honest. Word spread fast. Her friends unfollowed me. Her sister texted me, confused. My phone buzzed nonstop with questions I didn't have the energy to answer. Then came the messages from her. Angry ones, then sad ones, then manipulative ones. You're ruining my life. I never meant to hurt you. Everyone thinks you're heartless. The one that stuck with me came late at night. I would have taken care of you after they left. I stared at that sentence for a long time. After, I didn't reply. 2 weeks later, I went back to the apartment with a friend to get my stuff. She wasn't there, but her things were rearranged. Photos of us were gone. My books were stacked by the door. The spare room was empty. On the counter, a note. You made your choice. Don't come back. I smiled sadly. I packed my things quietly. The ring box sat on the dresser. I left it there. As I was about to leave, I noticed something on the fridge. A printed message. A screenshot of a group chat. Her friends. One message read, honestly, if he can't handle a little pain, marriage would have been hell. I took a photo of it, not for revenge, for closure. Healing took time. My jaw healed faster than my heart. Some nights, I replayed everything, wondering if I overreacted, if I should have waited. Then the pain would flare, and I'd remember sitting alone in a hospital chair while she partied, and the doubt would fade. Months later, I ran into her at a grocery store. She looked different, tired, smaller somehow. We made awkward small talk. Then she said quietly, I didn't think you'd actually leave. I nodded. I know. She looked away. I thought you'd always bend. That was the truth. And that's why I had to stop. I didn't lose her that day. I found myself. Sometimes closure isn't peace, it's distance. It was strange at first, suddenly being single after 4 years of building a life together. I kept expecting her to call, text, show up, but nothing. And the silence, it was deafening at first. Almost painful in its own way. I threw myself into work, into small routines, into anything that reminded me I was still me. Friends noticed a difference. I was quieter, yes, but there was an edge of calm now, like I'd finally stopped bracing for disappointment. I started sleeping better. Pain meds for my jaw were wearing off, and I actually had an appetite. I ate real food again. I even laughed at things that had seemed funny before but which she had always drowned out with her drama or sarcasm. And then came the letters. Not real letters, obviously emails, texts, messages. Some from her, some from mutual friends. Mostly gossip disguised as concern. Are you okay? Are you sure you're doing the right thing? I deleted most of them unread. But one caught my eye. It was from her best friend, a girl I'd trusted. Her tone was strangely apologetic. Look, I didn't want to say anything before, but she's been talking about you. Not in a good way. About the surgery, about how you made her life difficult. Honestly, she's lying to herself. I stared at the screen for a long time. So they all knew, and they were okay with it? I didn't reply. I just closed the laptop. It wasn't revenge that pushed me forward. Not at first. It was understanding, clarity, self-respect. I remembered every time I'd swallowed my needs. Every time I'd compromised, every time I'd felt too much. And I realized I wasn't too much. I was me. And she wasn't the person I thought she was. The first night I spent alone in my apartment after moving back in from my mom's house, I stared at the ceiling for hours. I thought about the wedding binder still sitting in the closet at her place, the floral arrangements, the seating chart, the dress I would never wear. And for the first time, I didn't feel pain. I felt free. I started writing again. I'd stopped writing personal stories after she criticized my blog posts, said they were embarrassing, too emotional. Now, I wrote every night, every thought, every memory, every grievance. It was messy, unfiltered, but it was mine, and slowly, I began to rebuild. Then came the encounter I didn't expect. I ran into her at a mutual friend's party 3 months later. I wasn't planning to go, my friends dragged me, but the universe has a sense of irony. She was there, in a bright dress, laughing with a crowd I didn't belong to anymore. I watched from across the room. She didn't see me at first. When our eyes met, though, everything froze. Not in a romantic way, not in a longing way, just in a moment that forced both of us to acknowledge what had ended. She smiled, hesitant. "Hey," she said. I nodded. "Hey." There was a pause, awkward and heavy. I could see her analyzing my face, probably trying to guess if I was hurt or bitter or lonely. I wasn't any of those things. I was calm, solid, alive. I heard about the surgery. Everything okay?" she asked cautiously. I shrugged. "Better than okay. It's done. I'm healing." She bit her lip. Good. I didn't mean for things to go like that." I smiled faintly. Not mockingly, just gently. "I know." And that was it. No apologies, no explanations, no justifications. The conversation ended because it had to end. Sometimes people don't change. Sometimes closure isn't an apology, it's simply the recognition that you're no longer part of their story. The weeks afterward, I noticed a shift in myself I hadn't expected. I was lighter, more confident, less cautious. I stopped bending over backward to avoid conflict, to make people comfortable at my expense. I spoke up at work. I pursued projects I'd shelved. I even started dating again, not because I wanted to replace her, but because I realized I could exist fully in the world on my own terms. The first date I went on was surreal. I caught myself laughing freely, joking without hesitation, not measuring every word. And when she reached for my hand in a gesture of comfort or flirtation, I didn't flinch. I smiled and let the moment happen, because this time, it was mutual, balanced, healthy. I thought about posting a story online, sharing my experience anonymously, the kind that goes viral on Reddit. I wanted others to know, you don't have to stay when they choose convenience over your well-being. You don't have to accept small betrayals because you love them. The story would be raw, painful, emotional, but truthful. And maybe, just maybe, it would help someone else wake up before it's too late. By the end of the year, I had my life back in a way I hadn't realized I'd lost it. The apartment was mine again, quiet, clean, organized. My books lined the shelves. My journals stacked neatly on the nightstand. Every little corner of my life reflected choices I'd made deliberately, not out of obligation or guilt. And I understood something essential. Love isn't about sacrifice at the expense of your health. Love isn't about staying quiet when your gut tells you something is wrong. Love isn't letting someone else's fun come before your basic dignity and care. Sometimes, love is knowing when to walk away. I didn't leave that night in anger. I didn't leave screaming or hurling accusations. I left with my head high and my heart open. I realized that the life I was meant to live wasn't tied to someone else's whims. It was tied to my choices, my boundaries, my willingness to value myself enough to never settle for less than respect. And that realization, that was everything. Sometimes closure isn't peace, it's distance. Sometimes the hardest thing is the bravest thing you'll ever do. And sometimes, walking away is the only way to find yourself again. The days after that party blurred into a rhythm I hadn't felt in years. I worked, I wrote, I healed. My jaw no longer throbbed, but the scars, tiny, internal ones, reminded me of the betrayal, the loneliness, and the clarity it had brought. One Saturday, I decided to finally go through the boxes I had packed and stored in my mom's garage. Old letters, keepsakes, mementos of our life together. Every object was a time capsule of a version of me that didn't exist anymore. I found a photo of us on a camping trip, both of us laughing, eyes closed, hair tangled by the wind. I almost cried, not for her, but for the version of myself that thought that laughter meant forever. Then I saw it, the wedding invitation we had designed together. I held it in my hands, ran my thumb over the embossed letters. We were supposed to get married in 6 months. I felt a pang, not regret, not sadness, just acknowledgement. I put it in the recycling bin. Life after her wasn't easy. It wasn't glamorous or cinematic. It was quiet, subtle, and real. I started dating again, tentatively. At first, it was awkward, fumbling conversations and first date nerves I thought I had outgrown. But gradually, I realized something amazing. I wasn't comparing anyone to her anymore. I wasn't measuring affection or attention against past hurts. I was free to explore connections on my own terms. One evening, over coffee with someone new, I realized I could finally articulate the lessons I had learned without anger coloring my words. I didn't lose her, I said quietly, stirring my latte. I found myself. The other person smiled, not understanding fully, but encouraging me nonetheless. And I knew it didn't matter if they ever did. The truth was mine, and that was enough. I also discovered something else: how much energy I had been wasting. Energy spent justifying myself, curbing my emotions, apologizing for needing basic care. Energy spent bending to someone else's whims. Now, I channeled it elsewhere. I started volunteering, helping people going through surgeries like mine. Sometimes I sat with them, sometimes I just listened. But every story reminded me that self-respect isn't selfish, it's survival. And slowly, my trust in people returned. Not blindly, not with reckless hope, but carefully, deliberately. Months later, on a crisp autumn morning, I walked past a cafe and saw her sitting there, alone, with her laptop, earbuds in, typing furiously. My first instinct was to ignore her. My second instinct was curiosity, just a flicker. She looked up briefly, saw me, and smiled. Not warmly, not apologetically, just casually, like a stranger on the street might smile. "Hey," I said. "Hey," she replied. We stood there for a few seconds. Neither of us had words that mattered anymore. I realized in that moment something important. The version of her I had loved didn't exist. She was still the same person who asked me to postpone my surgery for a weekend with friends, and I was no longer the person who would comply. We nodded politely, and I walked away. Not angrily, not sorrowfully, just deliberately. This is my life now, my choices, my body, my time. The weeks turned into months, and I began documenting my story online. I posted it anonymously on Reddit, the kind of subreddit where relationship stories go viral. The response was overwhelming. Messages from people thanking me, stories of their own experiences, comments that read, "I thought I was overreacting too, but reading this, maybe I wasn't." I realized then that my story mattered not just to me, but to others, that someone else, stuck in a relationship where their health, dignity, or voice was minimized, might read this and finally understand that walking away isn't failure, it's survival. I also started noticing changes in myself I hadn't anticipated. Confidence seeped into small interactions. I stopped apologizing when it wasn't necessary. I set boundaries at work and in friendships. I realized self-respect wasn't a battle, it was a lifestyle. I went on solo trips, something I never would have done with her, afraid she would complain or criticize. I explored small towns, hiked mountains, and sat by lakesides, notebook in hand. Writing became my therapy. Every sentence I penned was a stitch in the wound. She left a stitch that healed me rather than tied me down. Then came the unexpected moment of full closure. I got an email from her, months after the breakup. Subject line, "We need to talk." For a second, my heart leapt, not with hope, not with longing, but with awareness. I opened it. She wrote about regret, about reflection, about realizing how much she had prioritized appearances over people, about the friends who had encouraged her to see me as controlling, and how she now understood the truth. I read every word carefully, felt a flicker of old emotion, then closed the email. I didn't reply. I didn't need to. Closure wasn't in her apology. Closure was in the life I had rebuilt without her. I took a long walk that evening, the air crisp, the city quieting as dusk fell. My jaw still twinged occasionally, a reminder of the literal pain she had forced me to endure alone. But the emotional pain, that had been replaced by something stronger: clarity, confidence, and a sense of self I hadn't known existed before. I thought about how easy it would have been to stay, to bend, to sacrifice one more time. But I didn't. And that decision changed everything. I passed a couple holding hands, laughing, and smiled, not with longing, not with envy, but with acknowledgement. Love can exist, but only when it's mutual, healthy, and respectful. And if it isn't, you walk away. I returned home and looked in the mirror. My reflection was different. Not because my jaw looked better, though it did, but because my expression carried weightless confidence. My eyes weren't guarded, my shoulders weren't tense. My posture spoke for me now, and I whispered to myself, sometimes the hardest decision is the one that saves you. I didn't go back. I didn't call. I didn't even think of her for weeks after that. Instead, I focused on the people who truly mattered: friends who loved me unconditionally, family who supported me, and most importantly, myself. And slowly, but undeniably, I realized I was happy. Not the fleeting, dependent kind of happiness I'd known in that relationship. Not the kind built on compromise and fear of confrontation. Real, grounded, unapologetic happiness. Life moved forward. I traveled, I wrote. I laughed more freely than I had in years. I met new people not as replacements, not as distractions, but as reminders that the world is vast, And not every connection is toxic. Not every friendship or romance will demand your pain as collateral. And I learned something invaluable. The person you must fight for the most isn't anyone else. It's you. I didn't cancel my surgery. I didn't cancel my life. And I didn't cancel my future. I left her behind. And in doing so, I finally found my own path. Sometimes closure isn't about a conversation. Sometimes it's about walking away and never looking back. I didn't lose her that day. I found myself. The months that followed were quieter, but not empty. They were filled with reflection, small victories, and a slow rebuilding of my identity. For the first time in years, I wasn't living in reaction to someone else. I was creating a life deliberately, on my own terms. I started journaling every morning, not just about the past, but about the future. Dreams I'd shelved while bending to her whims began resurfacing. Writing workshops, weekend hikes, solo trips to cities I'd always wanted to see. Slowly, I remembered who I was without her, without the constant validation I'd been seeking, without the subtle guilt traps, without the relentless pressure to not be dramatic. I noticed changes in my friendships too. Friends who had quietly judged or stayed silent when she dismissed me now leaned in. Conversations that used to feel performative became authentic. I realized that some relationships in my life had survived because I'd started valuing myself more. One Saturday, I took a solo trip to the mountains. I hiked alone, surrounded by cold air and the quiet rustle of trees. I stopped at a cliff overlooking a valley below. The wind whipped my hair, stung my cheeks, and I closed my eyes, letting it fill me. No texts, no reminders, no obligations, just me, breathing. It was the first time I felt wholly alive in months. Then, out of nowhere, I got a message from her. I almost didn't open it, but curiosity gnawed at me. "Can we talk?" I stared at the screen. Not because I wanted to say yes, but because I realized how far I'd come. I remembered the night she asked me to delay surgery. I remembered the girls' weekend, the laughter that didn't include me, the subtle manipulations. I typed a single word in response: no. And I didn't feel guilty. I didn't feel anger. I didn't feel sadness. I felt closure. Weeks later, I met someone new. Her presence wasn't overwhelming or demanding. She listened. She asked questions. She laughed at my jokes without making me feel foolish. The difference was subtle, but profound. There was respect, mutual care, an understanding that I had a life outside of her. One evening, we were sitting on my balcony, watching the city lights flicker as the sun set. I felt calm, grounded, content. I thought about the past, the betrayal, the humiliation, the heartbreak, and I realized something important. The moments I thought had broken me had actually built me. Each hurt, each dismissal, each tiny humiliation had hardened my sense of self. I squeezed her hand, not because I needed to, but because I wanted to share the moment. And in that gesture, I understood. I could love again, fully, freely, without fear of losing myself. The final test came unexpectedly. A mutual friend invited both of us, her and me, to a casual dinner. I almost declined, but I wanted to see her one last time, to measure the growth, the difference. She arrived, radiant as ever, but something in her gaze flickered. There was hesitation, an unreadable tension. She approached me, smiled briefly, and murmured, "It's been a long time." I nodded politely. "Yes, it has." We made small talk, polite, controlled. No emotions spilled over, no old arguments resurfaced, no guilt, no accusations, just distance. A final acknowledgement that the life we once planned no longer existed, and that was okay. I left the dinner early, walking into the night alone. I felt no pain, only a strange, liberating peace. Over the next few months, I built new traditions. Saturday morning hikes, late-night writing sessions, coffee with friends who truly cared. I traveled alone, journaled relentlessly, and started saving for a small apartment of my own. For the first time in years, every decision I made was for me. Not to appease someone else, not to avoid conflict, not to keep the peace. The physical scars on my jaw healed completely, but the emotional scars left something better: clarity, strength, self-respect. I no longer questioned my instincts, no longer excused manipulation, no longer sacrificed my well-being for someone else's comfort. One evening, as I watched the sunset from my apartment balcony, I finally let myself reflect on everything: the pain, the betrayal, The anger, it had all led me here, to a place where I could breathe freely, a place where I could love and be loved without fear. I thought about the phrase that had haunted me during the surgery saga, babysit you while my friends are here. I laughed softly, shaking my head. How ridiculous it had seemed then. And yet, that ridiculousness had revealed a deeper truth about my relationship and, ultimately, about myself. I whispered quietly into the evening air, I didn't lose her. I found myself. And I truly meant it. Some lessons take time to sink in. Some scars take longer to heal. But sometimes, the hardest decision, the one that feels like it might break you, is the one that saves you entirely. Life moves on. People come and go. But the respect you earn for yourself? That's forever. I still think about that night before my surgery sometimes. The moment she asked me to cancel. The moment I realized I deserved better. And I smile not because I hate her. Not because I want revenge. But because I made a choice for me. And that choice changed everything. Sometimes, closure isn't peace. Sometimes, it's distance. Sometimes, the bravest thing you'll ever do is walk away. I didn't cancel my surgery. I didn't cancel my life. And I didn't cancel my future. I left her behind, and in doing so, I finally found my own path.